Perhaps many of you here have never met my youngest daughter. My mother's red-painted fingernail pointed directly at my face, cutting through the murmurs of dozens of elite strangers. She let out a cruel, bone-scraping laugh. This is Evelyn, the biggest burden and the ultimate humiliation of this family. While her sister is our pride and joy, she chose to crawl into some lowly military grunt work, staining the Mitchell family name. Mocking whispers echoed across the crystal-lit ballroom. I, an active-duty Army major who had survived the Syrian kill zones, stood perfectly still, my fists clenched at my sides, watching my own mother strip me bare and throw me into the trash. I braced my spine, refusing to break eye contact, when suddenly a deep, commanding voice carrying overwhelming authority shattered the room from the double doors. "What the hell did you just say about my savior?" Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you really want to know the ending of this story. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I grew up in a sprawling suburban Boston home where love was a currency I could never afford. My mother operated our household like a public relations firm. Every surface, every conversation, every interaction was engineered to project an image she had constructed long before I was born. Chloe, my older sister by 2 years, was the centerpiece of that image. She was the straight-A student, the debate champion, the girl who knew which fork to use at a charity dinner by the time she was 9. I watched from the hallway shadows one evening as my mother fed Chloe's latest report card through the laminator. The machine hummed and hissed, pushing out a sheet of sealed plastic. The burning smell of hot laminate filled the kitchen. My mother held it up to the light, inspecting it like a jeweler examining a diamond, then carried it into the living room and placed it on the fireplace mantel, alongside a row of identical trophies. Chloe's entire academic career was preserved in plastic mounted above the hearth for every visitor to admire. I stood in the hallway holding my own report card. A perfect score in mathematics. The paper was slightly crumpled in my sweating palm. I looked at the mantel. There was no space for me. I walked to the kitchen, pulled open the cabinet under the sink, and slid my report card into the trash can. I pressed the lid down gently so no one would hear it close. I learned early that in this house, excellence without glamour was entirely worthless. If it could not be laminated and displayed, it did not exist. My mother's metric of worth was consistent and merciless. Chloe received piano lessons, tailored dresses, weekend brunches with my mother's circle of socialite friends. I received hand-me-downs and silence. The contrast was never subtle. It was architectural. My mother built the family around Chloe the way a cathedral is built around the altar. On my 12th birthday, my mother forgot. She did not forget Chloe's birthday 3 months earlier when she rented out the back room of an Italian restaurant and invited 40 guests. For my birthday, I sat in the kitchen eating cereal while my mother talked on the phone about a charity gala. My father walked in, saw me sitting alone, and paused in the doorway. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He poured himself a cup of coffee, patted me on the shoulder without making eye contact, and walked out of the room. That pat on the shoulder was the most affection I received that year. I washed my cereal bowl dried, put it back in the cabinet, and went to my room. I did not remind anyone what day it was. When I was 14, I won the regional cross-country championship. I came home with the medal hanging around my neck, my shoes caked in mud. My mother was sitting in the living room with Chloe reviewing applications for a prestigious summer law program. I stood in the doorway holding my medal. My mother glanced up, looked at the mud on my shoes, and pointed toward the back door. "Take those off outside. You are tracking filth into my house." She turned back to Chloe's application. I took my shoes off on the back porch, hung my medal on the doorknob of my bedroom, and never mentioned the race to anyone in my family again. Every few months, my mother hosted dinner parties for her network of wealthy acquaintances. These were her stages. Chloe would be summoned to the dining room in a tailored outfit reciting her law school aspirations or her latest internship victories. The guests would nod approvingly, touching their pearls, murmuring about what a fine young woman Eleanor Mitchell had raised. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, keeping my posture rigid, my hands flat on my thighs, eating in silence. I did not volunteer conversation. I did not perform. One evening, a guest sitting near me leaned over, noticing my quiet demeanor. She opened her mouth to ask me something. My mother's head snapped toward us with the speed of a perimeter alarm. Her polite smile tightened. Her eyes darkened. She waved a dismissive hand in my direction and took a slow sip of her wine. Evelyn. She sighed, her voice carrying the practiced weariness of someone discussing a minor household inconvenience. The girl is fine. Just fine. The guest turned back to Chloe. The word fine wrapped around my throat like a wire and stayed there for years. That night, lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Not with tears, not with anger. With the cold precision of someone drawing a line in the dirt. I stopped trying to cross a finish line that my mother constantly moved. If my family refused to acknowledge my worth, I would forge it myself in a place they could not reach. I began waking up at 4 a.m. The house was dead silent. My mother's wine glass from the previous evening still sat on the kitchen counter, a faint red ring staining the rim. Chloe's law textbooks were stacked neatly on the dining table. I laced my running shoes by the back door, the same scuffed pair that had never made it to the mantel, and I ran. Miles through the freezing Boston rain. My lungs burned. My calves screamed. I ran until I could not hear my mother's voice in my head. I built a steel perimeter around my heart layer by layer, mile by mile. I treated my mother's coldness not as a tragedy, but as a tactical environment I needed to survive. Every cold morning was a training exercise. Every ignored achievement was another brick in my wall. By my senior year of high school, my physical and mental discipline were absolute. I maintained a 4.0 grade point average. I ran cross-country. I held a part-time job stocking shelves at a hardware store 3 towns over so my mother would not have to see me in a work apron and feel embarrassed. None of it was acknowledged. I watched my father avert his eyes every time my mother made a passive-aggressive comment about my plain clothes, my calloused hands, or my lack of social ambition. He never intervened. He never once said my name in my defense. He simply turned the page of his newspaper, retreating further into the fiction that everything in our house was fine. I did not shed a single tear. On the last night before I left for college, I packed my duffel bag in the dead of night. I folded my shirts with crisp, even creases, tucking them into tight rolls. I mapped out my exit strategy with the same discipline I would later use to plan convoy routes through hostile territory. I zipped the bag shut, slung it over my shoulder, and took one final look at the living room mantel. Chloe's laminated trophies gleamed under the porch light bleeding through the window. The mantel was full. I turned my back on it and walked out. 4 years later, I sat at the same kitchen island with a freshly printed bachelor's degree resting on the marble surface. I was 22 years old. I was fueled by absolute conviction. The same cold kitchen, the same heavy silence. My father sat at the end of the breakfast table, hiding behind his morning newspaper, the pages raised like a barricade between himself and any conversation that might demand his spine. My mother buttered her toast with calculated, delicate scrapes of her knife, each stroke deliberate, and measured the sound of the blade against bread, filling the room like a metronome. I placed my hands flat on the marble counter. I squared my shoulders. I had rehearsed this moment for 6 months. I had practiced saying the words in front of my dorm room mirror until they came out clean, without a tremor, without apology. I looked directly into my mother's eyes and delivered the news. I told them I was enlisting in the United States Army. I told them I'd already spoken to a recruiter. I told them my paperwork was ready. The air in the room solidified. My father's newspaper dropped half an inch. My mother slowly lowered her porcelain teacup onto its saucer. The ceramic clink against the marble sounded like a hammer cocking back. She did not look at me with the fear of a mother terrified for her child's safety. She did not flinch at the thought of her daughter in a combat zone. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. Her upper lip curled. She leaned forward, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the saucer. "The military," she hissed, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "You plan to drag the Mitchell name into the mud." I maintained my bearing, keeping my spine perfectly straight against the wooden chair. My hands did not move from the counter. I held her gaze without blinking. "I want to serve my country, Mom. I want to do something that actually has meaning." My mother let out a freezing, high-pitched laugh that pierced my eardrums and bounced off the kitchen tile. She set her toast down, wiped her fingers on a linen napkin, and leaned across the table until I could smell the sharp tang of her morning perfume mixed with contempt. Meaning, listen closely, Evelyn. Smart people with class never choose to crawl into the military. That is a dumping ground for dead-end failures who cannot climb into high society. My father said nothing. He lifted his newspaper back up. The pages rustled. He vanished behind the sports section, a ghost in his own kitchen, a man who had perfected the art of hearing nothing. I stared at the top of his head, waiting for a single word. He gave me none. My mother straightened in her chair, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. She waved her hand in the air, dismissing my entire existence with a flick of her wrist, the way she dismissed the gardener or the housekeeper when their work displeased her. "You could have done something better," she sneered, curling her fingers into air quotes around the word. "But you always choose the path that embarrasses me." I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with a wall built from decades of vanity. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wooden legs scraping against the kitchen floor. I stood up. I pushed the chair neatly back into its place under the counter. I picked up my degree from the marble surface, rolled it into a tight cylinder, and slid it into my back pocket. I walked out of the kitchen. As I passed through the hallway, I glanced at the fireplace mantel one final time. Chloe's laminated trophies stood in their usual formation, catching the morning light. Below them, in a small frame that my mother had placed there years ago, was a family portrait. My mother, my father, Chloe. I was not in it. The photo had been taken at a studio session I was told I could not attend because of a scheduling conflict. There was no scheduling conflict. I was simply not part of the picture my mother wanted to present to the world. I walked out of the front door without looking back. The morning air hit my face cold and sharp and free. I packed my entire life into a single duffel bag, the same one I'd used in high school, and I walked toward the Army recruiter's office 6 blocks away. I did not take the family portrait. I did not take a single photograph from that house. My mother did not follow me. My father did not call my name. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, and the house returned to its silence. Over the next 12 years, I lived 2 entirely separate lives. Inside the wire, I was a United States Army officer. I led men and women who trusted me with their lives, who slept in the dirt beside me, and never once questioned my competence because of my last name or my gender. I earned my commission through officer candidate school with the highest physical fitness score in my class. I completed Ranger School. I deployed twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. I climbed the ranks through sheer unrelenting performance. Through disciplined financial investments and years of frugal living on base, I built an impenetrable fortress of independence. No family trust fund, no inheritance. Every dollar was mine, earned in dust and sweat. Yet to my family, I remained a ghost. My mother never visited me on base. She never attended a single promotion ceremony. She never asked about my deployments. When I called home on holidays from a satellite phone in Kandahar, my mother answered with the same flat tone she used to acknowledge a telemarketer before hanging up. She asked no questions about my safety, my unit, or whether I had eaten a real meal. She talked about Chloe's latest court victory, or the new landscaping she had commissioned for the front yard. Then she handed the phone to my father, who said, "Stay safe, kiddo," and nothing else. When Chloe made senior partner at her law firm at 31, my mother threw a massive gala at the same country club where she hosted her dinner parties. She sent engraved invitations to 200 guests. My invitation arrived 3 days after the event, a clerical error she claimed. I called Chloe to congratulate her. Chloe sounded embarrassed on the phone. She told me she had assumed I was deployed and could not attend. She did not know my mother had sent the invitation late on purpose. When I pinned on the rank of major after 12 years of service, 3 combat deployments, and a commendation for valor, my phone vibrated on my barracks cot at the end of a 14-hour training day. I wiped the dust off the screen and opened the message from my mother. One word glowed in the dim light. "Congrats!" No period, no exclamation mark, no call, no warmth, no follow-up. No mention that her daughter had just achieved a rank that fewer than 5% of officers ever reach. I set the phone face down on the cot and stared at the concrete wall for exactly 5 seconds. I thought about the soldiers in my unit who had called their mothers that same week and spoken for an hour about their kids, their dogs, their weekend plans. Then I laced my boots and went back to work. 14 months before my mother pointed her red fingernail at me in that ballroom, the reality of my two worlds collided. I was deployed to Syria on a classified mission. My tactical unit was tasked with escorting a high-level diplomatic and military convoy through a hostile sector controlled by insurgent cells. The convoy consisted of 6 armored vehicles, including 2 VIP Suburbans carrying senior military officials to a forward operating base. I commanded the lead element from the 3rd Humvee. The desert was dead quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand at attention. My gunner scanned the ridgeline through his optic. My driver kept the vehicle tight in formation. I watched the road through the bulletproof glass, counting the seconds between my breaths. Then the earth tore itself apart. A massive improvised explosive device detonated beneath the lead vehicle. The shockwave hit my Humvee like a freight train, cracking the reinforced windshield and slamming my helmet against the headrest. My ears rang. Dust and smoke swallowed the convoy. Before the debris settled, heavy machine gun fire ripped through the formation from the ridgeline above. Tracers streaked across the desert. Our formation was immediately cut in half. The lead vehicle was burning. The tail vehicle reversed into a ditch. We were pinned. Panic is a luxury a commander cannot afford. My training overrode my adrenaline in the space of a single heartbeat. I wiped blood from a cut on my forehead, grabbed my rifle, and kicked open the armored door of my Humvee. I dropped into the dust and incoming fire. Rounds snapped past my head, close enough that I could feel the pressure waves against my cheek. I pressed my back against the engine block, pulled my radio to my mouth, and barked orders with the same cold voice I had built in a kitchen in Boston where no one listened. This time, everyone listened. I established overlapping fields of fire to suppress the ridgeline. My squad responded instantly. Suppressive fire erupted from our position, buying seconds, precious seconds. One of the VIP Suburbans was pinned down 40 meters ahead, its engine block smoking, its doors jammed from the blast concussion. I grabbed 2 infantrymen by their body armor, pointed at the Suburban, and gave a single command. We sprinted straight through the blind crossfire rounds, kicking up dirt at our feet. I reached the Suburban, first grabbed the door handle, and ripped the jammed passenger door open with a strength I did not know I possessed. The hinges screamed. I pulled 2 passengers out and shoved them behind the nearest armored wheel for cover. Through the choking smoke and the deafening crack of rifle fire, I dragged an older man out of the wreckage. His uniform was torn. Blood ran from a gash above his left eye. But his eyes, they were the coldest, sharpest, eagle-like eyes I had ever seen on a human being. He did not panic. He did not cry out. He evaluated. He looked at the terrain, at my soldiers, at the suppressive fire pattern, and he nodded once. I secured him behind the engine block and returned fire until the quick reaction force arrived 11 minutes later. A week after the ambush, I was called into a secure briefing room at a forward operating base. I walked in expecting a standard after-action review. The man sitting at the table was the same man I had dragged from the wreckage. He was cleaned up now, wearing a pressed uniform with 4 gleaming stars on each shoulder. General Arthur Harrison, a living legend in the United States Army, the kind of officer whose name was spoken in hushed tones at the Pentagon. He stood when I entered the room. A 4-star general stood up for a major. The 2 aides in the room stiffened, clearly unaccustomed to seeing the general rise for anyone below a 2-star. He extended his hand and gripped mine with the iron grip of a man who understood what blood-forged loyalty meant. He looked at me, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. He told me that my actions under fire had saved the lives of 3 senior officials, including his own. He told me that the soldiers in my squad had called my composure under fire the coldest thing they had ever witnessed. He said he had read my entire service record overnight, and that what he found was a pattern of excellence that had been systematically ignored by everyone outside the Army. I walked out of that room with a Bronze Star added to my service record and a relationship I intended to keep private. General Harrison gave me his direct phone number, handwritten on the back of a government business card. He told me to call him if I ever needed anything. I tucked the card into my breast pocket and said nothing more than, "Thank you, sir." I told no one in my family. They had not earned the right to know. My mother would have turned the Bronze Star into a dinner party anecdote, a trinket to display between Chloe's laminated awards. I would not give her that ammunition. 3 weeks before Chloe's engagement party, I was sitting at my desk on base auditing personnel files under the fluorescent lights of my office. Chloe had called me earlier that week, genuinely excited, her voice light and warm in a way that reminded me she was the only Mitchell who had never aimed a weapon at me. She was marrying Daniel Harrison, a successful architect who designed government buildings. She asked me to come to the engagement party. I said yes. What Chloe did not know, and what I discovered only after running Daniel's last name through my own mental Rolodex and confirming it through Army records, was that Daniel Harrison was the son of General Arthur Harrison, the same general whose life I had saved in a Syrian kill zone 14 months ago. The same general who had given me his personal phone number on the back of a business card that I still carried in my breast pocket. My mother did not know this connection existed. She only knew that a 4-star general was going to be at her party, and she treated that information like a winning lottery ticket. She viewed the general as her golden ticket to the absolute apex of Boston society. I leaned back in my chair and let the irony settle over me like a cold blanket. The general whose life I had saved in Syria was about to become my brother-in-law's father. My mother was about to parade around a party bragging about a military connection she had spent 12 years degrading. The collision course was set. I did not alter it. I simply noted it the way I noted an enemy position on a tactical map and continued my work. My personal cell phone rang at my desk. I saw my mother's name on the screen. I had not heard from her in 4 months, not since a 2-sentence text informing me of the engagement without asking if I planned to attend. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear. Evelyn, she barked into the receiver, issuing a command as if I were a servant who had just tracked mud into her pristine foyer. Listen to me very carefully. Your sister's engagement party is gathering the most elite people in the state. Daniel's father is a 4-star general. So I am demanding this of you: do not embarrass your sister. I stopped typing. My fingers tightened around the plastic body of my government-issued ballpoint pen. I took a slow, tactical breath, filling my lungs for a 4 count and releasing for a 4 count. What exactly do you mean by that? Her voice dropped into a venomous, patronizing hiss, the same tone she used when I was 15 and wore the wrong shoes to her friend's garden party. Do not open your mouth and ramble on about your little military camping trips. Do not try to act like you are important. You will pollute the atmosphere. Just keep your mouth shut and be a shadow. She did not wait for a response. She did not ask if I was healthy, if I was safe, if I had eaten. She did not ask a single question about my life. The line went dead. A dial tone echoed in my ear like the flatline monitor of a relationship that had been brain dead for decades. She had only called to ensure I would remain invisible at the event she intended to dominate. The plastic pen in my hand snapped in two with a sharp crack. Black ink bled onto my fingers, pooling in the creases of my knuckles. I stared at the ink for 3 seconds. An ordinary soldier can withstand a barrage of enemy artillery, but the cruelty of blood relatives always knows how to bypass the Kevlar and strike the soft tissue underneath. I threw the broken pen into the wastebasket and pulled a sterile alcohol pad from my desk drawer. I wiped my hands clean, methodical, thorough, the way I cleaned my weapon after a range day. I was not angry with Chloe. She was innocent in this crossfire. She had always been a bystander in our mother's war against me, positioned as the golden trophy without ever asking to be placed on that mantle. Chloe had never once spoken a cruel word to me. She had never compared herself to me. She had simply existed inside the spotlight my mother aimed at her, unaware of the shadow it cast over me. I did not blame the spotlight for the darkness. I blamed the hand that aimed it. I leaned back in my chair, interlocked my fingers behind my head, and stared at the ceiling tiles. I ran the scenario through my mind. My mother was orchestrating a high society engagement party. She had explicitly ordered me to be invisible. General Arthur Harrison, the man I had dragged from a burning vehicle 14 months ago, would be in attendance. My mother did not know about Syria. She did not know about the Bronze Star. She did not know that her despised daughter had saved the life of the man she was planning to worship. I decided I would deploy to this party. I would not engage the hostile. I would wear no medals. I would carry no evidence of my service. I would simply observe my mother's theater of vanity, confirm Chloe's happiness, and extract myself before my mother could weaponize my presence. I pulled a fresh pen from my desk drawer and went back to my paperwork. My hand was steady. I pulled my vehicle up to the Royal Club on the evening of the engagement party. The valet opened the door and I stepped onto the pavement wearing a minimalist tailored black suit. No medals, no ribbons, no unit insignia. Just a dark silhouette against a sea of sequined gowns and custom tuxedos. I adjusted my jacket collar, a habit from years of uniform inspections, and walked through the gold-leafed front doors. The ballroom hit me like a flashbang grenade. Suffocatingly bright, illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers that threw fractured light across every surface. The noise was immediate, a wall of champagne laughter, clinking glassware, and string quartet music that blended into a single, nauseating hum. I immediately fell into my combat baseline. My eyes swept the room in a practiced pattern. 2 primary exits, one at the east wall behind the service corridor, one at the main entrance behind me. A choke point at the bar where the crowd bottlenecked around a champagne tower. 3 structural pillars along the north wall that could provide cover. I cataloged all of it in under 4 seconds. Through the sea of moving bodies, I spotted my mother. She was draped in an aggressively expensive emerald gown that caught the chandelier light like a beacon. She glided through the crowd like a monarch, touring her kingdom, her chin elevated, her smile locked in place. She was drunk on her own perceived power, moving from cluster to cluster of wealthy socialites, loudly bragging about her new elite connections, her brilliant lawyer daughter, and the upcoming arrival of her 4-star in-law. She spoke of General Harrison as though she had personally recruited him into the family. She looked invincible. Then she turned her head and saw me. Across 50 feet of polished marble floor, our eyes locked. The exchange lasted less than 2 seconds, but the information transmitted was absolute. My mother's plastic smile vanished for a fraction of a heartbeat. She narrowed her eyes and shot me a chilling, ironclad warning glare. She raised her champagne flute slightly toward me, a silent command. The message was the same one she had delivered on the phone. Stay invisible. Do not ruin this. Do not breathe too loudly. Do not exist. I did not nod. I did not flinch. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion, staring back at her with the blank, calculating eyes of an intelligence officer assessing a person of interest through a one-way mirror. She held my gaze for one more beat, then quickly looked away, unnerved by what she saw in my eyes, or rather by what she did not see. Fear, obedience. She saw neither. I took a position against the back wall near the east exit, clasping my hands behind my back in a loose, at-ease stance. My back pressed against the cool plaster wall, a habit from 12 years of never sitting with my back to a door. A waiter approached with a silver tray of champagne flutes. I shook my head once, a single crisp motion dismissing him. He moved on without a word. From my position, I had a clear sightline across the entire ballroom. I watched my mother work the room, moving from group to group, touching arms, leaning in to whisper, pulling back to laugh at her own wit. She mentioned General Harrison's name in every conversation, dropping it like a currency she had not earned. She told one group he was a personal friend of the family. She told another he had specifically requested to attend. Every word was a fabrication. She had never spoken to the man. She did not know his face. She only knew his rank and the social capital it represented. I watched Chloe circulating through the room with Daniel, her hand resting on his arm, her smile genuine and unguarded. Daniel looked comfortable and kind, the way people look when they have nothing to prove. She looked happy. That was the only reason I remained in this building. I settled my breathing, dropping my heart rate to a resting 60 beats per minute. The music played, the champagne flowed. The elites laughed at jokes they had rehearsed in the mirror. I stood motionless against the wall, a ghost in my own family's house. I waited for the operation to proceed. In Syria, I had waited 14 hours in a concealed position for a target to emerge. I could wait through one evening of champagne and pretension. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. A sharp silence fell over the ballroom like a guillotine blade. My mother had left the crowd and was marching toward the raised stage at the front of the room, her emerald gown trailing behind her. She reached the microphone stand and seized the microphone. A piercing screech of feedback echoed off the marble walls, causing several guests to wince. The crowd fell silent and turned toward the stage. She began her speech. She showered Chloe with praise so excessive it bordered on worship, calling her the crown jewel of the Mitchell legacy, elevating Daniel to the heavens, declaring their union a merger of two great dynasties. The crowd applauded politely, champagne glasses raised. I remained against the back wall, my face a mask of stone. My hands stayed clasped behind my back. I counted my breaths. But my mother was not finished. The praise for Chloe was not enough. To make the light shine brighter, she needed to create a shadow. She needed a sacrifice. She needed a dark background. Her smile turned into a jagged blade. She raised her hand, extending that same red-painted fingernail I'd watched point at Chloe's laminated trophies for 20 years, and aimed it directly over the heads of the crowd, straight at my chest. Of course, many of you here have never met my youngest daughter. She announced, her voice amplified through the sound system and bouncing off every wall. Every head in the ballroom swiveled toward me. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto the dark figure standing alone against the back wall. This is Evelyn, the absolute biggest disappointment of our family. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. My father, seated at a table near the stage, stared at his shoes. His hands gripped his napkin under the table. Chloe's face drained of blood. She lunged toward the stage, grabbing my mother's arm. "Mom! What are you doing?" she hissed in a panicked whisper, her fingers digging into the emerald fabric. My mother yanked her arm away, drunk on cruelty, feeding off the crowd's attention like a parasite. "You see," she continued into the microphone, adjusting her grip, "while Chloe inherited all the ambition and achievement, Evelyn prefers to move backward, choosing lowly menial labor." She gestured grandly toward Chloe, her golden child glowing under the stage light. Then she swung her hand back toward the far wall and pointed at me again. "Over there is my golden child." She paused for effect. "And there is the misfit." The ballroom felt like a vacuum chamber. Pitying stares from the women in sequined gowns. Disgusted whispers from the men in tuxedos. A few guests covered their mouths. One woman near the bar set her champagne down and shook her head slowly, unable to watch. A waiter standing near the service corridor looked at the floor. Even the strangers in this room understood that what they were witnessing was wrong. But no one intervened. No one stepped up to the microphone and told my mother to stop. That was the cruelest part. A room full of powerful people, and not one of them possessed the courage to protect a stranger from her own mother. This was her masterpiece of destruction. She had spent 34 years building this moment, and she delivered it with the cold efficiency of an executioner. I did not drop my head. I did not cross my arms defensively. I did not clench my jaw. I shifted my feet exactly shoulder width apart, placed my hands firmly behind my back, and stood at perfect parade rest. I looked straight down the 50-foot sightline into my mother's eyes. I offered no reaction, no tears, no anger, no satisfaction. My absolute, terrifying silence made her triumphant smile twitch at the corners. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to run. I held my ground. I had held ground under machine gun fire. A microphone and a ballroom full of strangers were not going to break my bearing. If you have ever stood silently while your own family tore down your self-worth just to make themselves look better, please like this video and share your story in the comments. Knowing you are not alone is the first step to building an armor they can never pierce. Before the whispers of the crowd could rise any further, before my mother could bask in her, kill, the heavy oak double doors of the ballroom slammed open with a force that shook the crystal pendants on the chandeliers. The air was sucked out of the room. Every guest froze mid-sentence. The string quartet musicians lowered their instruments. General Arthur Harrison walked into the ballroom. The temperature of the room changed. The air thickened. Every conversation died mid-sentence. He was dressed in his full Class A dress uniform, the dark blue fabric pressed to razor-sharp creases, a chest full of combat ribbons and decorations arranged in perfect rows, each one representing a deployment or an action that the civilians in this room could not begin to comprehend. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder board, catching the chandelier light and throwing small points of light across the marble walls. The sheer crushing weight of his presence forced the room into submission. He moved the way a warship moves into port, slow, deliberate, and with a gravitational pull that bent everything around him. 2 aides flanked him 3 steps behind, but they were invisible. The general consumed the room. My mother reacted first. She dropped the microphone onto the podium with a dull thud. She practically sprinted off the stage, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble, and pasted a manic, fawning smile onto her face. She smoothed her emerald gown with shaking hands as she rushed to intercept him at the center of the ballroom. "Oh, General Harrison!" She gasped, bowing her head and extending both hands outward like a supplicant approaching a king. "It is an absolute honor for the Mitchell family to welcome you. Please right this way to the seat of honor." She gestured toward the head table where a seat had been reserved with a gold place card bearing his name. General Harrison did not even break his stride. He gave her a single perfunctory nod, the kind of nod you give a toll booth operator. His eagle eyes, the same eyes I had seen through smoke and gunfire in the Syrian desert, scanned the room with the practiced sweep of a man who had commanded battlefields on 4 continents. He ignored her outstretched hands. He ignored her fawning. He ignored the seat of honor. His eyes reached the far wall of the ballroom. They locked onto me. The stern, chiseled lines of the general's face instantly broke. The rigid command posture softened into a look of absolute, unyielding reverence. The kind of look a man gives to the person who pulled him from a burning vehicle while bullets tore through the air above their heads. My mother stood in the middle of the ballroom, with her hands awkwardly grasping the air where his hands should have been. Her smile began to crack. The general walked past her without a second glance. He strode straight through the center of the ballroom, his polished dress shoes striking the marble with a heavy rhythmic thud that echoed like a drum cadence. The elite crowd parted instinctively, stepping aside without being asked the way civilians move when they sense the weight of real authority passing through. He marched directly toward the dark corner where the misfit stood. I saw him coming. I recognized his gait before I recognized his face. I had memorized the cadence of his footsteps in the debriefing room in Syria. I snapped to the position of attention. Chin level, arms locked at my sides, eyes forward. General Harrison stopped 2 feet from me. He was close enough that I could see the reflection of the chandelier in his polished stars. In front of hundreds of stunned billionaires and socialites, in front of the woman who had just called me the family disappointment. The 4-star general extended his right hand and bowed his head slightly. "Major Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom with the weight of a battlefield commendation. "It is a profound honor to see you again." I took his hand and shook it, firm, controlled. The grip of 2 soldiers who had shared a kill zone. The silence in the room was absolute. Not a single champagne glass moved. Not a single guest breathed. My mother stopped functioning. She stumbled forward from the center of the room, her face draining of color, her emerald gown suddenly looking like a costume on a woman playing a role she was no longer cast in. Her smile twisted into a grotesque mask of panic, the expression of someone watching their entire narrative unravel in real time. "General," she stammered, reaching for him, her voice cracking. "General Harrison, you are mistaken. That is just Evelyn, she—" The general cut her off. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words carried the lethal authority of a bayonet leveled at a throat. "I never mistake the people who saved my life, ma'am." He turned back to me, and the reverence returned to his face. "I had hoped you would be here tonight, Major." I looked past the general's shoulder and locked eyes with my mother. Her mouth hung open. Her manicured hands trembled at her sides. Her vanity empire was beginning to burn, and she could smell the smoke, but could not find the fire. My mother's worldview fractured in real time. She stumbled forward another step, clutching the diamond pendant at her throat, frantically trying to glue her reality back together with the same desperate energy she used to laminate Chloe's report cards. "Saved your life," she stammered, shaking her head violently. "Impossible. You must be confusing her with another officer. Our Evelyn just runs trivial errands at the base." General Harrison's eyes narrowed into slits. The warmth he had shown me evaporated. He pivoted toward my mother, squaring his shoulders, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Trivial errands," he repeated, his voice a controlled detonation. Mrs. Mitchell, 14 months ago, my convoy was ambushed in a Syrian kill zone. We were surrounded, outgunned, pinned down under heavy fire. And the woman you just called a disappointment took command of the battlefield. Murmurs erupted across the crowd. Guests exchanged stunned glances. Several veterans in attendance, men in dark suits with lapel pins bearing unit insignias, stood up straighter. The general continued, his voice rising, not shouting, but projecting with the practiced resonance of a man accustomed to addressing formations of thousands. Major Mitchell ran directly into heavy machine gun fire, maintaining a terrifyingly cold head to pull me out of a burning armored vehicle. She rallied her squad, established a defensive perimeter, and held that position until reinforcements arrived. If she wasn't there, you wouldn't have a general to host tonight. My mother was shaking violently. Her champagne glass trembled in her grip. She reached for the general's sleeve, a desperate, pathetic grab for control. "But, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "tonight is about Chloe." The general ripped his arm away from her touch. "Tonight is about your family." He barked, his voice cracking like a rifle shot. The chandelier crystals rattled. "You should be ashamed of your blindness. My men would die for Major Mitchell. Real soldiers would crawl through fire for the woman standing right there." He pointed at me. "Do not ever disrespect my officer." Somewhere in the crowd, a crystal champagne glass slipped from a guest's frozen fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was sharp and final, like the crack of a gavel. No one moved to clean it up. The dynamic of the room inverted immediately and completely. The same elites who had stared at me with pity minutes ago now turned their backs on my mother. She stood in the center of the ballroom, alone, reaching for arms that pulled away from her touch, calling names that pretended not to hear. Her emerald gown, the gown she had chosen to project power, now looked like a costume, abandoned after a failed performance. They lined up one by one to shake my hand. A retired colonel in a dark suit gripped my palm and held it for a long moment, nodding with a silent understanding that needed no words. His lapel pin bore the insignia of the 82nd Airborne. A woman I'd never met squeezed my shoulder and whispered that her grandson served in the army and that she understood what sacrifice looked like. Another guest, a silver-haired businessman who had been standing near my mother when she made her speech, walked up to me and said quietly that he was ashamed he had not spoken up sooner. I told him that silence was a common casualty. The party ended early. Guests collected their coats and filed out with the brisk efficiency of people who wanted to distance themselves from a scene they would retell over brunch for weeks. The valet line stretched out the door. When the ballroom emptied, only the family remained. The crystal chandeliers still blazed, but the room felt hollow, stripped of its glamour. Champagne flutes sat abandoned on every surface, lipstick stains on their rims, like evidence at a crime scene. Chloe ran to me in tears, throwing her arms around my neck and squeezing me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat hammering against my chest. Her body shook with sobs. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," she choked into my shoulder. I never knew any of it. Syria, the Bronze Star, none of it. She never told us." I squeezed her shoulder once firmly, the way I would reassure a fellow soldier after a hard operation. I wanted to tell her it was not her fault. I wanted to tell her that she had been a pawn in the same game I had been discarded from. But those words could wait for a quieter day. She pulled away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, her mascara smearing across her cheekbones. Daniel stepped forward, took her hand, and guided her gently out of the ballroom, his hand on the small of her back. He nodded to me once as they passed. A simple, respectful nod from a man who had just watched his future mother-in-law destroy herself in public. My father followed them without speaking, his eyes on the floor, carrying the same empty expression he had worn behind his newspaper for 34 years. Finally, it was just me and my mother in the cavernous, quiet hall. The shattered champagne glass still glittered on the marble floor between us. She sat collapsed on a gilded chair near the empty stage, her posture destroyed, her emerald gown wrinkled and bunched around her knees. Her makeup was smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks. The mascara had mixed with tears and foundation, creating a ruined mask that revealed the face underneath, older, smaller, and utterly pathetic. She looked up at me with the eyes of a woman who had just watched her entire empire burn to the ground in a single evening. The same eyes that had dismissed me over cereal bowls and dinner tables and laminated report cards. The same eyes that had looked at me and seen nothing. Now those eyes were begging. "Why didn't you tell me?" She choked out, her voice raw and stripped of every ounce of authority it had ever carried. I looked down at her. I stood over her the way I had stood over the wreckage in Syria, surveying the damage. I searched my own chest for rage. I found none. I found only a chilling surgical indifference, the emotional equivalent of a flatline. "Tell you why, Mom. So you could turn my combat record into a shiny accessory to brag to your friends. Or so you could call me a violent grunt." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, her hands gripping the sides of the gilded chair until her knuckles turned white. "I am your mother," she choked. "I just wanted you to have class." I stepped closer. My shoes crunched on a shard of the broken champagne glass that still lay scattered across the marble between us. I bent my knees slightly so my eyes were level with hers. Her mascara had left dark trails down her cheeks. Her lipstick was smeared from pressing her hand against her mouth. She looked 20 years older than she had at the start of the evening. I delivered the final blow at close range, every word measured, every syllable precise, the way I delivered a briefing to my commanding officer. No emotion, no tremor, just facts. "Your class is built on humiliation. My class is built on blood and honor. You had 34 years to ask who I was. The truth isn't that you didn't know me, it's that you never wanted to." I straightened up. I adjusted my jacket. I turned and walked toward the east exit, my footsteps echoing in the empty ballroom. I did not look back. Behind me, I heard my mother collapse forward in the chair, a sound like a marionette whose strings had been cut. I pushed through the exit door and stepped into the cold night air. I stood on the stone steps of the Royal Club and took one long, slow breath. The air tasted clean. The sky was black and starless, and for the first time in 34 years, the weight on my chest was gone. 3 months after the ballroom incident, I stood on the parade field at my military installation. The wind was sharp, snapping the garrison flags against their metal poles with a crisp, rhythmic crack. The grass was cut to regulation length. 200 soldiers stood in formation, their boots polished, their uniforms pressed their eyes forward. I was wearing my pristine dress uniform, my chest heavy with the medals I'd earned in the dark, in the dust, in the fire that my family had never cared to see. Today, I was not defending a position. I was taking command. The post-commanding officer stepped forward from behind the wooden podium. He addressed the formation and the gathered audience with a brief recitation of my service record. 3 combat deployments, a Bronze Star for valor, 12 years of continuous service to the United States Army. He read the list of operations I had led, the soldiers I had mentored, the missions I had completed. The audience listened in silence. My mother listened in silence. He held a small black velvet case in his hands. He opened it, revealing the silver oak leaf insignia of a lieutenant colonel gleaming in the morning light. He stepped toward me, reached up and firmly pinned the silver oak leaves onto both shoulders of my uniform. The metal was cold against my collarbone. The snap of each pin locking into place was the only sound on the parade field. 200 soldiers saluted in unison, the sound of their hands snapping to their brows, cutting through the morning air like a drumbeat. I turned to face the audience seated in folding chairs behind the formation. Chloe sat in the front row, beaming with a pride so genuine it radiated from her like heat. Daniel sat beside her, his arm around the back of her chair, nodding quietly. My father sat next to them, his hands folded in his lap, his chin dipped slightly. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that might have been remorse. And right in the center seat of the front row sat my mother. She was not wearing an aggressively expensive gown. She was not draped in emerald or gold or anything designed to attract attention. She wore a simple muted gray coat buttoned to the collar. Her hair was pulled back without ornament. She did not scan the crowd looking for generals to manipulate or socialites to impress. She did not hold a champagne flute. Her hands were gripped tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale against the dark fabric of her coat. When my name was announced over the loudspeaker and the formation was called to present arms, my mother was the very first person in the audience to stand up. She did not cheer loudly to draw attention to herself. She did not wave. She did not call out my name for the crowd to hear. She just stood there alone, tears streaming down her face in two silent lines, her lips pressed tightly together, clapping with a desperate, pure sincerity that I had never seen from her before. Her vanity had burned away in that ballroom 3 months ago, and what remained was the painful, naked realization of what she had almost destroyed. The laminated trophies on the mantel, the emerald gowns, the elite dinner parties, the golden child. None of it had ever been real. The real thing was standing on that parade field, wearing silver oak leaves and the scars she had never bothered to see. She finally saw me. Not the misfit, not the disappointment, not the girl whose report card went into the trash can under the sink. She saw a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army standing on a parade field, surrounded by soldiers who would follow her into fire. She saw the daughter she had tried to erase for 34 years, and that daughter was the most powerful person on that field. I gave her a brief stoic nod, one single dip of my chin, the same nod I gave my soldiers when they completed a mission. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. I saw you stand. I saw you cry. I saw you try. Whether it was enough remained to be seen. That was her work to do now, not mine. Then I turned my eyes back to my formation, 200 men and women who had earned my loyalty through blood and service, who had stood beside me in the worst moments of my life without asking for a laminated trophy in return, and I stepped forward to take command. We do not fight to seek the applause of those who are blind to our worth. We fight because we have a duty to something greater than ourselves. The most devastating revenge against those who belittle you is not screaming back at them. It is building your own fortress in silence, forging your spirit in iron, and letting your undeniable truth speak for itself. If my journey from the shadow of a toxic family to commanding my own destiny resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe, and share your own experiences below. We do not need the approval of those who refuse to see our true worth, because our actions will always speak for themselves.